From Half-Life in 1998 to Half-Life Alyx, one of the most revolutionary VR games of all time, Valve Software has changed the way that people fundamentally play games. The story of how two former Microsoft employees took a risk and changed the PC game space is truly an intriguing one. Let's look at Valve Software's history, from Half-Life to Half-Life Alyx. Valve LLC, better known today as Valve Corporation, was founded in 1996 by Gabe Newell and Mike Harrington. While Valve itself may have begun in 1996, our story starts a good deal earlier, at the software giant Microsoft. Gabe Newell worked at Microsoft starting in 1983 after he dropped out of Harvard that same year. While at the tech giant, he worked on Windows development, as well as working to port the popular DOS game Doom into Microsoft's new OS. After 13 years at Microsoft, Gabe Newell and Mike Harrington made the bold move to leave their jobs and invest together in starting a games development company that would become Valve Software. Harrington and Newell were heavily inspired by the popular FPS games Quake and Doom by id Software. They would license the Quake engine from id Software for their project, and would end up changing it into what would become known as the Gold Source engine. Valve added advanced enemy AI as well as other features like support for the up-and-coming 3D standard Direct3D. Valve started by making a game that they were hoping would be able to be released around the same time of Quake 2. However, they were unhappy with how the game played and scrapped most of the level building work that had been done up until this point. To try and figure out what would make a level fun, Valve created a group of 6 people, called the Cabal, that would look at the work of each separate team and decide what elements lead to fun gameplay and level design. The members of the Cabal would rotate to be sure that it was a unified opinion within the development team. It was also around this time that Valve would bring on the science fiction writer Mark Laidlaw to work on the game's narrative and story. Valve and their publisher, Sierra Games, would go on to do a large amount of playtesting before the game's release. This constant playtesting allowed the Cabal group to further determine what would lead to fun gameplay. Half-Life was shown at E3 1998, where it would win many Game of the Show awards from the press, as well as a large number of other accolades. Half-Life would be released in 1998, 2 years after the company was founded. Half-Life defined the genre of narrative first-person shooters. The rich storytelling and clever puzzles became staples of the Half-Life franchise. Half-Life would see 2 expansions, both of which would not be developed internally at Valve, but by Gearbox Software. In 1999, Half-Life Opposing Force would be released and published by Sierra Games. Half-Life Blue Shift was originally meant for the Sega Dreamcast, but would be cancelled and brought to PC as sales of the console dropped sharply. Valve's next project would start the long tradition of hiring community figures to work on games for the company. Valve took interest in a mod for Quake known as Team Fortress, and would decide to hire the team to develop Team Fortress in the Gold Source engine as a standalone game. This would be known as Team Fortress 1.5, or later Team Fortress Classic. It was released on April 7, 1999, after some delays in development. The game was well received and helped to define the class-based shooter genre. During the rest of the 90s, Valve worked on various projects, not all of which were as successful as others. Valve did, however, continue the practice of hiring community members. For example, hiring the small development team of Min Lee and Jesse Cliff, who were behind the Half-Life mod known as Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike was a team-based shooter where terrorists and counter-terrorists would face off in round-based combat. The betas for the mod had seen massive attention online, which is what led to the team being on Valve's radar. The game would go on to be released and finished as Half-Life Counter-Strike in September of 2000. The game was also the first to see the Valve Anti-Cheat System, or VAC, which was added to Counter-Strike in 2002 to help combat a cheating problem. Valve took interest in a similar Half-Life mod known as Day of Defeat, a first-person shooter based around World War II combat. Valve acquired the rights to the game in 2003 and released it in May of that year. Throughout this time, Valve had been working on the sequel to Half-Life. Reportedly, Valve started work right after Half-Life 1's release in 1999. The developers wanted to make Half-Life 2 have a much larger scope. As reported in the final hours of Half-Life 2, Gabe Newell said, "Why spend 4 years of your life building something that isn't innovative and is basically pointless? If Half-Life 2 isn't viewed as the best PC game of all time, it's going to completely bum out a lot of the guys on this team." The team at Valve was dead set on not just making a sequel as a cash grab, but making a game that would impact the PC game space. Valve started work on the Source engine, a sequel to Gold Source, to be developed along with Half-Life 2. In addition to this, Valve decided to license the Havoc physics engine for the game, so that it could feature realistic physics puzzles. At the start of development of Half-Life 2, Newell said that the team would have a virtually unlimited budget, as well as no set release target, to allow them the freedom to make something truly groundbreaking. It was around this time that Mike Harrington, the co-founder of Valve, decided to leave the company. His departure from the company had a massive effect on Gabe Newell, with him saying, "It was really hard. Mike was the one person who I could talk to more than anyone else about things that worried me." Newell would ultimately decide to stay and press on with the development of Half-Life 2. In 2002, Newell was shown a proof-of-concept trailer that was supposed to show the direction the game would take. Newell was concerned that there was too many dialogue-heavy sequences and that fans of the game would not be pleased. The team at Valve were in a massive crunch by this point, as there was a lot of pressure to make a game that would meet the high standards set by the fans and Newell himself. A target of unveiling the game at E3 2003 was set, with a release date of September 30th of that same year. However, it was soon apparent to the team that a target release of September was not realistic, but Gabe Newell pushed hard to meet that deadline. 1 week before the target release, Valve stated that they were moving the launch back until holiday of that year. Needless to say, fans were not happy, and there were many rumors as to whether or not the game was even in any sort of a playable state. Fans found out the state of the game sooner than they were expecting when a hacker leaked a pre-release build of the game to the public. It showed that there was no way Valve could have shipped the game in September. The development team at Valve took the hacking leak hard and initially struggled to pick back up on development. It was now clear to everyone that Half-Life 2 would not launch in 2003, and to avoid the past mistake of September, Newell decided to stay silent on when the game would be done. Development conditions at Valve were said to have been very hard during this period, and from 2003 up until October of 2004, it was apparent that the development team at Valve was struggling from burnout. Half-Life 2 launched on November 16, 2004, along with the Steam distribution service. The game was met with almost universal praise from critics as well as fans. It is more than safe to say that Newell's goal of making something revolutionary was more than achieved. After the horrible experience that was the 5-year development cycle for Half-Life 2, Valve decided that a more episodic approach to Half-Life storytelling would help to eliminate burnout. They started work on Half-Life Aftermath in late 2004, and in February of 2006, the final name of Episode 1 was announced. There were to be 3 episodes to follow, with the final Episode 3 coming holiday of 2007. Episode 1 and Episode 2 were developed simultaneously, using the same build of the Source engine. Episode 1 released on June 1st, 2006, and Episode 2 followed on October 10th, 2007 as part of the Orange Box bundle. Valve returned to its roots of hiring promising young development teams when Gabe Newell hired the entire team of a game demo called Nerbacular Drop, which was made by students of the DigiPen Institute of Technology. The game used portals to move around the level, and Valve was so impressed that they wanted to make it into a full game. When this game was early on in development at Valve, there was not much of a story focus. But as more playtesters grew curious as to their characters' in-game motivation, the team worked with Half-Life writers Mark Laidlaw and Eric Wolpaw to tie the game into the Half-Life universe. The game was finished in only 2 years, with a development team of only around 10 people. The game was released via the Orange Box compilation in October of 2007. Team Fortress 2 originally started development in 1999, with a demo video being shown at E3 of that year. The art style of the game was to be a realistic military shooter in a similar vein to Counter-Strike. The game would be delayed in 2000 and entered into the realm of vaporware, with no news coming until October of 2004, when Valve stated that the game was in fact still in development. The game was seen for the first time with its final visual style at E3 of 2006. The game took on a 1950s cartoon look and was said by the developers to have heavily drawn from the works of Norman Rockwell. The game features 9 playable classes, each loosely based on the classes from Team Fortress 1 in 1999. The game would be released in October of 2007 as the multiplayer component of the Orange Box. It was met with almost universal critical acclaim and still has over 60,000 active players today in 2020. After the release of the Orange Box in 2007, from the outside, it appeared that Valve was not working on anywhere near as much content as in years past, especially when it came to the beloved Half-Life franchise. Valve did acquire Turtle Rock Studios, who was responsible for porting many of Valve's titles to consoles. Turtle Rock released Left 4 Dead, with Valve as the publisher, on November 17, 2009. The game was a cooperative zombie survival shooter in which players help each other through a map filled with AI-controlled zombies. Left 4 Dead 2 was released only 1 year after Left 4 Dead, and made some fans worry that it would lead to the first game and its community being ruined. Valve, in response, flew 2 of the boycotters to their headquarters to playtest the game, and this helped to calm fears in the community. In 2010, Turtle Rock would be split off from Valve, as the studio stated it was too hard to communicate with the parent company, all the way in Seattle. During the time since the release of Portal, Valve had been working on a sequel which would become known as Portal 2. The game's development team was greatly increased from that of Portal 1, going from around 10 active developers to as many as 40. The scope of the game increased dramatically from that of Portal 1 as well, with the total playtime going from around 3 hours of Portal 1 to the 10-hour campaign seen in Portal 2. Portal 2 also had a co-op mode, featuring a unique and separate story, adding almost another 5 hours to the game. Valve also hired the community creators of the student game Tag: The Power of Paint to work on the new gel mechanics that would be prominently featured throughout the campaign in Portal 2. The story, written by Jay Pinkerton, Eric Wolpaw, and Chet Falzek, would also be more in-depth than the first game, with many subtle nods to the greater Half-Life universe. The game was very well received, with Gabe Newell himself saying that Portal 2 is the best thing we've ever done. After the release of Portal 2, journalist Jeff Keighley wrote that, according to Newell, Portal 2 will probably be Valve's last game with an isolated single-player experience. Releasing shortly after Portal 2, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, or CSGO, was the popular sequel to Counter-Strike Source. The game was developed as a collaboration between Valve and Hidden Path Entertainment. The game's development began when Hidden Path Entertainment started work on a port of CS Source to consoles, and Valve decided it would be smart to switch to development on a full-on sequel. The development time for CSGO was quite short for a game of its scale, with development starting in 2010 and the game releasing in August of 2012 for all platforms, with the Linux version coming a little bit late in September. The game had a positive reception from fans of the series, and the game has continued to see major updates as well as player numbers well into the 600,000s. In December of 2018, the game was made free to play, with people who had bought the game in the past receiving a Prime status that allows for enhanced matchmaking and cosmetic drops. New, free users can upgrade to get this paid status. After 2012, Valve entered into a period of public silence. Dota 2, a Source Engine sequel to the popular mod for Warcraft 3, came out in 2013. It required specialized additions to the Source Engine and had character work done by Valve writers such as Mark Laidlaw, science fiction author Ted Comlet, and Chris Katz. The game also had work done on contract by major members of the Dota community. Besides Dota 2, not much was released publicly by Valve during this time. The company turned its focus to other ventures, such as their partnership with HTC on the Vive and the creation of Steam VR. To go along with the Vive, Valve released a compilation of VR minigames called The Lab in 2016. The Lab gave Valve fans the smallest taste of what some of the company's biggest IPs might look like in VR. This partnership with HTC would turn into Valve's own VR headset later down the line, called the Index, releasing in June of 2019. In 2018, Valve released Artifact, a trading card game set in the Dota universe. They worked with the creator of Magic the Gathering, Richard Garfield, to develop the gameplay, strategy, as well as the style of the game. The game initially saw backlash from fans of Valve due to it being seen as a cash grab. For fans of the game, they were very much so annoyed that they had been shut out of the beta and other launch problems, which caused player numbers to fall very quickly after launch. In response, the team opted to put the game back into development as they worked to fix some of the fans' complaints. Dota Underlords, a game in the auto chess genre, came out as a beta in June of 2019 with a full release in February of 2020. It was based on a popular community-made game mode for Dota 2 called Dota Auto Chess. The game was well received by fans of the genre and has seen player numbers into the 5,000s range since launch. It was also the first game using Valve's Source Engine 2 to release on mobile phones. Valve broke their years of silence on the status of Half-Life development on November 18, 2019. Valve announced the upcoming release of Half-Life Alyx in March of 2020. The game would take place between the events of Half-Life and Half-Life 2 and would be a VR-only experience. The reaction was generally positive from the community, even though some were upset that the game would require VR equipment, which can be quite expensive. Half-Life Alyx was critically praised for all it brought to the VR space, bringing with it the legendary physics and story of Half-Life. The jump in graphical fidelity and interactivity from Half-Life 2 to Half-Life Alyx was comparable to the jump from Half-Life to Half-Life 2. Shortly after release, Half-Life Alyx SDK, tools, and the workshop were added to Steam, which allowed fans to make mods for the game, as well as use the Source 2 engine and share their creations via the Steam workshop. Thanks to the final hours of Half-Life Alyx by Jeff Keighley, fans were able to get a look into the development of all of the failed Half-Life 2 sequels. The open and flat management style of Valve led to a lot of change in project direction and canceling as staff moved from department to department. Valve started and canceled as many as 6 Half-Life games since Half-Life Episode 2. Valve Software has undeniably been a key player in the PC game space since the release of Half-Life. The commitment to quality that Valve has shown has been a blessing and a curse for Valve as well as Valve's many fans. While at any point, Valve could have gone the way of other game companies in making a sea of mediocre sequels, Valve chose quality over quantity every time. This decision to release only good content is what has added to the weight of a new Valve game release. While Valve's history between now and Half-Life may be impressive, one can only imagine what else the company has in store for the future.